a little bit later. Do we have any apologies for tonight's meeting, councillors? I think Councillor Colin may be a little bit late. He's only arrived back, I think, from Paris or soiree somewhere in Europe. Oh no, here he is. He's there. How was Paris? You didn't ride a bike? We were looking for you in the Tour of France, but never mind. There's no apologies, there's no leave of absence, and we have no non-attendance. Section 3 is the confirmation of the council minutes. We have a recommendation there that the minutes and the confidential minutes of the meeting of the ordinary council meeting held Tuesday the 27th of June be confirmed as a true and correct record of that meeting. Do we have any questions in relation to that, councillors? If not, would someone like to move that recommendation? Yeah. Thanks, Councillor Lynn. Would someone like to second that, Councillor Michael? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Yep. Oh, pardon me. We'll go back to the beginning, back to the future, and an acknowledgement of country. We would like to acknowledge the Ngadjuri and the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians of the lands and waters of the Light Regional Council area. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are present today. My apologies. We move on now to section 4, which is the communications. It's been an interesting period for the Mayor, highlighted by our citizenship ceremony. And I must thank Corey and Steve Nelson for their assistance on that occasion. We had 8 citizenships that particular day. And with the help of Lorinda also, the process has been streamlined somewhat. The words that were used for these ceremonies were very cumbersome and in many cases repeated themselves. So they have been streamlined somewhat and makes things a lot easier for everybody concerned. It was a really, truly lovely ceremony in this room with the new chairs and everything else there, and it was decorated appropriately for the occasion. And of all the ceremonies that I've been involved with, and there's been many, I'd say this would be ranking right up the top. And the people that were there that day really did appreciate the fact that they were there. We even had someone that knew Councillor Phillips Ryder's little daughter, friend, and a very good friend, Fabio, who works with Fabio. So it was a little bit localised. Also, we had the AGM of the Men's Shed, or now called the Kapunda Shed. That's a property that takes into account people who have retired and are looking for companionship and something to do. And they also are contracted to our council to operate the recycle depot. They do some wonderful work and they've got many, many members now. And I see Mr. Ross Vote here tonight. And I remember fondly, Ross, yourself and myself being at the very first opening of the Men's Shed, because it was your concept in the first instance, if I remember correctly. They've come a long way since then, and they're providing a marvellous service for people in our community. They did bestow a little gift on me, so I hope everyone's going to behave themselves tonight, because I've got a little token of Ned Kelly here that I'm just going to try and find out whether the rifle works or not. So behave yourself, everybody. But it was a nice feeling to be among a lot of friends and to see that that organisation really moving forward and doing the right thing by our community. We had a function down at the Greenock Primary School. They're an active community, as we're all aware, down in Greenock, and they're always doing something. Now they've got interpretive panels around the place, or further interpretive panels around the place for the many visitors Greenock receives. We've had media communication. One of the matters was the Hanson Street Teely Highway intersection. I think we'll see something in the paper in relation to that tomorrow, but I think we're at arm's length with that particular issue, and I don't think I've spoken out of turn at all. And I think we all know the issues there. People's, in many cases, just poor driving. They just don't want to give way. Well, I don't know whether whatever road we put there will solve that problem. But we'll see what the media come out with tomorrow. We also had a very informed meeting yesterday with the local member, Penny Pratt, member for Frome, Richard, myself and Kyron, to talk about the Good Shed and talk about that project there, and looking for her advocacy in taking that forward. I know there's an appetite within the chamber for us to look at doing something down in that precinct, but we would like to own it if possible, rather than be investing in someone else's property. So we put the case pretty well forward. And in fact, we had 2 hours with Penny yesterday, so I think it was worthwhile. She got the message. So just hopefully she can take that to the Parliament and we'll get some response somewhere. That's probably pretty much all for me. We did have a SAROC board meeting also, and that let me down a little bit. There was a lot of things that were going on with that meeting that truly surrounded governance more so than what we should be thinking about and doing. I get getting a little bit sort of tired of the local government association, I suppose. But having these meetings, and Richard and myself were attended one recently at the Novotel, and it seems to be all about governance. And we seems to have, maybe it's only my opinion, may have lost our way in what we're here to do. We're here to look after our people and get projects going and get cracking. And we just don't want to keep talking about ourselves and how we manage ourselves, because that seems to have taken a huge, big chunk of our time each time that the association meets. But it's probably me just being a little bit unkind. That's it. Are any elected members have anything to report? Yeah, thanks, Lynette. Councillor Lynette.
Attended the farm meeting last Tuesday, and they have now acknowledged the grilling op shop with signage above the doors into the kitchen to say that $30,000 was given by them, and because op shop paid for the whole thing, and it was a very interesting meeting because they have applied for some of the grant fund money, which they weren't going to, but they put in 3 applications. So, okay.
Thanks, Councillor Lynette. Good to see it, the action. Any other reports?
Just 2 for me.
Councillor Michael.
Mayor Bill, I had a meeting with the GRFMA over the past week or 2, and there'll be some matters that come out of that meeting. I think the subject of a future council meeting is a further meeting of the GRFMA board next week. And I had the benefit of meeting Tony Piccolo this afternoon before attending today. That was really just an introductory meeting. We happened to cross paths at the Wasleys 150th event about a month or 2 ago, and so it was good to have a chat and meet Tony. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Michael. Any further reports, councillors? If not, we'll move on. We don't have any petitions. So we'll move on now to our deputations and presentations, and it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce Carol Absalom, Greg Micken and Ross Vogt, who are 3 of the stalwarts behind the Pines Conservation Reserve that is managed on behalf of council. Ross, I think you might all be aware, has celebrated his 100th birthday, and I have a lot to thank Ross for, or the opposite. Probably, I think it must have been 43 or 44 years ago now, I came over here to work on the as a tourism development officer part-time and throw the rubbish on the back of the truck for the rest of the week. And Ross was on the panel that appointed me into that position. So I've got a lot to thank you for, Ross, for being so wise at the time and choosing me for that position, because it's been a wonderful journey. But I'd like to introduce now the team from the Pines to give us a little presentation on what's happening out there. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Mayor Bill. and thank you one and all for the support that you throw towards the Pines in your, what's the name? Can't you hear me? Oh, sorry. Thank you, Councillor Ross. You've only just got back here and you're swinging your cap. Firstly, I'd just like to introduce Carol and Ross, who you will hear from shortly. Anyway, over the next 40 minutes or so, oh, sorry, 10 minutes.
I was going to put him away, but I won't.
We'll talk about that's right, I've got to remember to point it here. Can I move your, what is your water? Remember to do this in a minute. So we'll look at the history, recent developments, what to see and do, and the aims and objectives. But first of all, who has been out to the Pines? By a show of hands, who's been to the Pines? Bit disappointing, Peter. Give yourself a good uppercut. If you haven't been out there, 7 kilometres between here and Tarlee, get out there and have a look at it. It's a lovely place. I'll introduce Ross Vogt. Ross Vogt, as Bill said, became a centenarian earlier this year. He also, along with Clyde Hazel, are the founders of the present day group of volunteers who manage the Pines. Ross has been a tireless worker and contributed many thousands of dollars of his own money and countless hours of time towards the betterment of the facility. And we're proud to have him as our patron. So, Ross, if you can tell us about the history of the Pines.
I must apologise that the hearing is such I don't know what has been said. I've been asked to give some picture of the early history of the Pines Conservation Reserve. It is so named because of the forest plantation on this site in the 1880s. The last harvesting of these pines occurred in 1931. 2 rows were left standing. The Pines also incorporates the former Taylor's Run Reservoir, which supplied water to the town by gravitation flow from the late 1800s until approximately 1957. This photo of the water tower shows the channel from which the water was drawn. The reservoir no longer holds water, and so the channel is dry. The inset on the right shows one of the 3 filters or sleeves just to prevent fish and other joining the water.
You're going well.
The water flowed through the water pipe approximately 80 metres from the water tower to the Turncock house. The water pipe is housed in a tunnel which passes under the southern embankment of the reservoir. This tunnel was built to avoid having to let all of the water out of the reservoir in the event of maintenance being needed to be carried out on the water pipe. The Turncock house was, you guessed it, a turncock, a large cast iron valve with a huge wheel, both of which were unfortunately stolen several years ago. By the way, this icon building is not, as many refer to it, as a pump house. Water was not pumped. It flowed by gravitation to the town. The Pines Reserve was the site of much of the town's early social activity, and picnics were a regular event, as I remember. Amenities had a tennis court, a shelter shed, 3 stone chimneys with which open fires adequate to a crude barbecue, and 2 long drop toilets. I'll have to hand you back to Greg.
Thank you, Ross. Now, some of you will know Carol Absalom because she's actively but quietly involved in a number of community activities and organisations. Carol is our Vice President. She's a great organiser and a very competent administrator, and has been instrumental in the planting of many hundreds of shrubs, trees and various vegetation in recent years. So, Carol, thank you.
Hi, everyone. A couple of years ago, a group of dedicated volunteers planted about 100 trees around the bird hive, shrubs and lower trees to complement the tall trees that we've got, to try and encourage a bit more of the bird life around. Unfortunately, none of these survived after the recent rains flooded the reservoir for quite some time. And unfortunately they drowned. If it was only just a quick submersion, they would have survived, but we lost all of them. More recently, we planted another couple of 100 trees adjacent to the campsite area, and we're still planting. We've still got another 150 in reserve to go in, and we just need a bit of help digging the holes. It's the hardest part. Thanks to Kim Ryan, Jason Grain and Mike Patching, we have a replacement turncock recently installed to illustrate what was previously there. And whilst not a recent addition, you might be aware there's a fully functioning toilet at the Pines. We don't have to have the long drops anymore. We do have a shelter shed, and that's utilised very frequently for gatherings, parties and picnics. There is a bird hive, which many people also utilise. So we have a visitor's book in the bird hide, and that showed that many people were using it. We encouraged them to leave comments, and almost all of them were very, very positive. We also have a functioning pool below the water, below the bird hide, that operates on a ball and float, and that encourages birds, so that people have actually got something to see without craning their necks to the ones that are 50 feet up. Thanks to funding from Light Regional Council, we now have a number of new photo interpretive signs, as well as directional markers to indicate the various walking trails. And we have quite a few of those now. We've, with the help of Greg and friends, we've added to the amount of walking trails that you can use. Another recent development is a levelling of an area adjacent to Apsley Height Road for the purpose of a campsite. The area has been specifically developed for the Boy Scout groups, Girl Guides and school groups and other appropriate groups. However, we might consider hiring the site for some other occasions, but probably not birthdays, 18th birthdays, 21st or bucks parties, or hens. I shouldn't leave that out. So I'll hand back to Greg and we'll tell you what else there is to see and do at the Pines. And excuse the gravelly voice, it's always like that.
Thank you, Carol. People visit the Pines for various reasons. For most, it's for a relaxing walk or a picnic. For others, it's to enjoy the flora, the fauna, and the abundant bird life. There are half a dozen or so walking trails of varying degrees of difficulty. Now, that isn't actually one of them, but it's a nice photo. The flora varies. I'll use my left hand. It's left-handed, I reckon. The flora varies depending on the seasons, and the golden wattle, which of course is Australia's national floral emblem, is particularly as spectacular at the present time. Some of the regular bird life include kookaburras, Adelaide rosellas, white-winged choughs, brown tree creepers, and if you're lucky, you may spot an echidna, but you're more likely to see their diggings, which are easy to identify by the conical hole made by their pointy nose. And it's encouraging to see a growing number of echidna diggings around the place at the moment. Kangaroos can often be seen. When it comes to reptiles, more likely to see a sleepy lizard than a snake. In fact, I've only ever seen one snake at the Pines in almost 70 years. The reason being that they're very shy creatures, and so too the rhinoceros. You have to sit very quietly and be very patient for a long time to see a rhino at the Pines. So the aims and objectives, our constitution and agreement with Light Regional Council states that the role of the Pines Management Committee is to improve the, maintain and improve the facility for the benefit of locals and visitors alike. The majority of visitors to the Pines are walkers, picnickers, bird watchers, and we provide information that helps them to also learn about the history, the flora and the fauna out there. Regular visitors often tell us what enhancements they would like to see at the Pines, and because it is a conservation and recreation facility, it's sometimes difficult to a difficult balancing act, which often results in some robust discussion at our monthly meetings. And by the way, this is a list of our present day committee members, and as you can see, Mayor Bill and is one of our valued members, and Dean does a fantastic job as our secretary. In closing, and on behalf of members of the Pines Management Committee and the people who visit the Pines, we'd like to thank you, Light Regional Council, for your support in many ways. I should just finish by saying that one of the disappointing things that saddens all community organisations, including council, of course, is the damage and theft of public property. Unfortunately, the Pines has incurred several instances of theft in recent times. Theft of items such as door closers on the toilet door, plumbing, and just recently, for the second time, a $3,000 ride-on mower, which Ross Folk generously donated. A chainsaw, brush cutter, and some other tools were stolen, despite our best efforts to ramp up security over a number of years. Unfortunately, because of the remoteness of the location, we can't get insurance. And it's since been agreed that once we've replaced these essential items, they'll be kept off-site. Now, Dean has made a submission under the Community Project Funding Program, Your Say Your Future, and I respectfully ask that you good people look favourably on our submission when the time comes. Are there any questions?
Councillor Bill.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Bill. Yeah, Greg, the toilet, do you maintain that and clean it, and how's that? Is it open all the time, or how's that operated?
It is open all the time, and we have a roster system where somebody goes out there a couple of times a week and just gives a bit of sweep out and flush out and one thing and another, and we pretty much maintain. And I must say, apart from theft of door closers and copper pipe and so on, that's been maintained fairly well. Now, for those,
Bill, Greg, just a question that I might want to talk to council about is the functions that are held out there. There's quite a number, I believe. Can you just give us a bit of an idea about what they are and how many?
yes, actually, we've had, I suppose, in the last 2 or 3 years, we've had about 4 weddings out there, a couple of funerals. In fact, Bill's
My son
son,
was,
one of Bill's sons got married out there. How long ago, Bill?
oh gee,
Long time ago.
a long
Yeah.
time ago.
But it is used for quite a number of different functions. And as Carol said, if anybody wanted to have an event out there, you know, 40th birthday, we had somebody's well known to you all. You know, we're a bit selective in who we say yes and no to, but we like the right people to be able to use it for the right reasons.
We had also probably around 2,000 people at Jeanette's funeral also.
About 1,000, or just over 1,000, I believe. For those of you heathens who haven't been out there yet, there's actually, I'll pass it. Could you pass those around to everybody? Because there's this is a new brochure which shows the new walking trails that have just recently been established. And if you haven't been there, get out and have a look at it.
Are you concerned about the amount of wood that's lying on the ground out there? Like there's a lot of sugar gum, I know, but there seems to be a lot of timber lying on the ground. You're not worried if a good fire goes through, you're going to lose a lot? Like could you do understory management a bit? Because it does all seem to be very top heavy canopy that falls to the ground, and it looks pretty dangerous to me if there is a fire.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And we are in regular consultation with the CFS and National Parks, and we are aware that we need to monitor that fairly closely. And that's what we've actually got a Pines meeting tomorrow, and it's something that will be discussed. But we're mindful of the fact that we've got to leave some rotting timber there for the nature, habitat and so on. But you make a good point, there is a lot of dead wood that shouldn't be there.
Yeah, a lot of that big timber, you could harvest it. Like it could be not take it all, but a percentage could be used, couldn't it, for firewood or something? Or you just have you're not looking at that at all.
Over the time, we've had a number of contractors in there, but we don't want them to denude it altogether. But on advisement from CFS and others, we think there's a lot more that could and should go. So I'll give you a call and come out and give me a hand. We'll get rid of it.
Maybe just one, I was thinking about fire. Can the scouts have bonfires on if they camp there? What's this?
Yeah, so long as it's not fire dangerous season and all precautions are taken. We have had requests for a smoking ceremony out there by
Thank you, Greg. And, thank you for a great presentation, Carol, Ross and Greg. Sorry, one more question?
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, Michael.
Thanks. Thanks for your presentation, and I'm go and have a look because I'm ashamed to admit that I haven't been there as yet. So I can see you have made a submission. You mentioned you've made a submission in response to council's invitation to the community to make submissions for the community projects as part of the last budget deliberations. My question is, you seem to be having some issues with theft. So it might be a question for the CEO or for you or for whoever wants to answer it. But I mean, has any thought been given to whether council can extend its insurance cover to something like this, or what security precautions can be put in place to prevent? I'm not talking about putting a security guard there, but like some sort of a measure to dissuade people from doing it.
I've had some conversations with Megan on this matter, and we're investigating a way whereby that might be able to happen, but I'm not sure whether we've got a definite answer yet. But that certainly was something that we've considered. But can you answer any more than that, Megan? Is it have we resolve that, or is there still some work to do on finding out whether it's feasible?
Through the chair, we have had discussions. The situation with insurance, it can be covered by council's insurance if we own the asset. That's not an issue at all. But what we've also been trying to do, I think, we've tried to, think strengthen some doors for you, and we've had some locksmiths out there as well.
Thank you, Megan.
That has been ramped up, that security, and thanks to Matthew, Justin Matthew. He has done things that, but we still think it's unwise to leave anything out there because people want it, they'll get it.
Yep.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, thank you,
Thanks, Bill.
Greg. And thank you, Carol, Ross and Greg for, an excellent presentation full of good humour and lots of facts. We must commend you too for the dedication and the enthusiasm that still remains with the small group that are maintaining that wonderful reserve. And it's a credit to people involved. And it was lovely to see you here tonight to be able to explain to the chamber exactly where we're up to at the moment. And certainly we hope you can keep up the good work. And we look forward to the future at the Pines. Been some wonderful occasions out there, and see that's going to happen more so in the future as well.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Stick to smoke signals, Greg. Yeah, well, my apologies. I'm sorry about that.
No, I was just wondering.
Just another mistake. It's okay. Chalk them up. Councillors, we have no adjourned business. So we move to item 8, which is our action items. Action items on page 7. Any comments in relation to any of those matters? Page 8. Or page 9. And page 10. I think we've got Dr. Nigel here tonight also to give us a little chat at some stage about the adoption of the 23-24 annual business plan. Okay, we'll go back to that. Thank you, Nigel.
Just some good news, Mayor Bill, regarding the declaration of the rates action item. So all things going well with the printers, and the rate notices will be going out on Friday. And simultaneously, the website will have the new and improved application process for the rebate. That's just my advertisement.
Well done to you and your team. Thank you. Thank you, Nigel. Now I'll go back to page 9, councillors. I think Councillor Collin had a question.
Yeah, so I've just got a question about the event strategy. I see there's the first draft has been prepared for internal review. So internal review, that doesn't include us, is that right? Or
I think the peers will review what's been prepared and give it a tick, and it'll come to the chamber. That would be my understanding. Is Kyron here tonight? Kyron, is that correct?
Yeah, through the chair. So Liz has prepared a draft. I'm yet to review it in detail, and we also want to distribute it internally, particularly with strategy team and Lorinda's group, before we just, I guess, endorse it to come to council.
What stage would we be up to, Kyron? Just about to finish?
Yeah, so through the chair, so that we have a draft ready
Right.
to review internally. So
Right, so that,
once that's done, there may be some changes before we present it to council, but yeah, we certainly want it to represent the full position of all
Sure.
our administration.
I think that's right and the proper thing to do. So we could expect that perhaps at the next council meeting, maybe,
Yeah, this is on the flag for a bit at the moment. So
yeah. All right, so, but it's in hand and that's looking good. Thanks, Kyron. Councillor Collins?
Well, the other thing was, you discussed it earlier, that you had a meeting with Penny Pratt about the goods shed. I was just wondering, I see it's in here, but I'm just wondering what she can do, if anything.
Well, that's a good point, but all we could do is what we've done, and the presentation was first class, and she went away with a lot of information plus a lot of coloured prints of what the place looks like and what needs to happen, and what some of the options are. I guess now we just got to hope that she can be strong with it. She seemed pretty keen, and she knew a lot more about it than I thought she would. And just got to hope now that she can present that to the right office and get some traction. We presented more than just the goods shed, though, didn't we? We presented the whole project, which included the Great Australian Wine Trail as well, which she's had a fair bit to do with in the past, because it's a multi-council project. But I might pass over to Richard or Kyron, who were at that meeting, to see if they could perhaps express what Penny was up to better than I can.
yeah, through the chair. So the outcomes from the meeting is that Penny will advocate for activation of that particular section of the rail corridor, and in particular to work with the Department of Infrastructure and Transport to explore a longer term lease of that section of land than the 5-year terms that they currently have with council on other parts of the Swan Path, or indeed a sale of the land to really free it up for private sector investment, or in partnership with council. So next step for us is to provide a bit more background in how we would see council working with DIT, so that she can prepare how she's going to advocate to the minister.
Thank you. Page 10, councillors. I think we got to page 10. If not, we'll move on. Section 9 of our agenda tonight is the recommendations from committees, and 9.1 is the Strategy and Economic Development Committee, and the attachments are in the agenda. And there's a recommendation at the top. Thanks, Councillor Lynn. Would someone like to second that recommendation? Councillor Beale. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Recommendation 2 is that the reports and recommendations of the meeting of the Light Regional Strategy and Economic Development Committee meeting held Tuesday, 11th of July 23, numbered 1, as listed below, be adopted. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Bill. Second, Councillor Dean. Are there any questions, councillors? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thanks, councillors. We'll move on now to our reports for information. And the first one is the 10.1. There's a Mother River Road Annie Terrace intersection. Are there any questions, councillors, in relation to this matter? Councillor Michael.
Thanks, Mayor Bill, and thanks to Jason for the report. It's just a couple of questions from me. So just a query: when will the proposed vegetation maintenance and line marking adjustments be carried out? Here's the first question. The other questions relate to the funding streams for improvements to Mother Wirra Road that are currently forecast to occur in 2024, 2025. So the questions that I have are, do we know the outcome of the grant application that's been submitted under the Heavy Vehicle Productivity Program? If not, when will we know? What other projects are reliant upon that funding stream? And perhaps can we get an update on the status of that grant application and any other grant applications relating to forward infrastructure spending at a future meeting?
So, Jason, do you want to separate those questions if we can?
Yeah, so maybe if we start with probably the easier one is when are we going to do the work? I guess, when's it going to be finished?
Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, just through the chair, just to confirm that's Jason Winston's report, not mine, but I'll try to assist where I can.
Oh,
As far as vegetation works, that'll be sort of a 2-week, 3-week sort of in the program to get those works done. So there's only a realignment of a couple of trees on the southern side of the intersection that need to be done. So shouldn't be too much for our team to get through those matters. And I think he's also spoken about a realignment of the Kipway bar as well.
Yeah.
As part of those works, so that'd be in line with the contractor to do those works. So
So in the next few weeks, I guess.
Yep.
We're sort of saying, yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So then just in relation to the future work for Motherwell Road that's subject to the heavy vehicle productivity program funding. So when will we know the outcome of that grant application, or do we know it already?
I might pass over to Govind.
Through the chair, we haven't heard anything back on the application, so as soon as we hear about it, Megan will send out a response to the elected members.
Yeah.
Once we know about the outcome of the grant application.
Okay. And are there a number of projects that are reliant on this?
From the heavy vehicle perspective, that's the only one. I mean, we've already got funding for the Roseworthy Road.
Yeah.
And then there's a couple of other SLRP funding that we've applied for as well under the special local roads program.
Okay. So would it be possible to get maybe a bit of a presentation or an overview on where we're up to in terms of maybe for the next financial year, which projects are subject to a grant and where we're up to, or what our level of confidence is?
yeah, through the chair. So the April IC report had a funding strategy report in there. All the roads that we've going to go for funding will be in that report.
Yeah.
A lot of these funding programs don't have a timing when they get back to us, so we put in applications, and unfortunately that when they get back to us does change from year to year. So we probably don't have a lot of confidence to say we can give you a definite date on when that may be, but that report will give you the roads we've got over the next 4 years, the funding strategies that we're trying to achieve, and then it's sort of relying on whether we get approval or not. So.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Was that the report to the April meeting of council?
Infrastructure committee, and then
Or the infrastructure committee, but then it would have come to council
Yes.
and it would have been adopted.
Yes.
So if we could get a copy of that and perhaps it could be emailed out,
No problems.
that would help you.
Yeah, I mean, what'd be good is
So you're
maybe
going
just
back through.
maybe just a bit of a
minutes.
presentation on summarising it, revisiting it, and checking in on it.
Yep.
Because it seems to me then so that the IAMP is somewhat underwritten by these funding streams. Is that a fair assumption? Yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to identify is if the community have expectations of certain projects occurring at certain times, they may not appreciate, to be fair, not everyone has the time to unpick all the detail, that some of those projects may be reliant on those funding applications. So it'd be good to know where not.
If we could distill this report from April and just get some timelines onto that,
That would be
maybe a
fantastic.
future presentation at council with those very facts
That would be great.
would be helpful.
Yep. Thank you.
Can we, think we can manage that? Well, perhaps Megan? Would that be possible? All right, thanks for the questions. And thanks, Jason. Thank you, Megan. Okay, that's a report for information. Any further questions on that particular matter? If not, we'll move to the next one.
Just
Councillor
while on
Collins?
roads, I forgot as I'd written in my notes, on page 8, on action items.
Oh,
I forgot. Yeah, sorry. I wrote in my notes about roads and I just see, can we go back to that or not? Or,
Oh, we can, of course.
so I just see on the 3rd of July, staff met with Dick regarding the main street. The motion on notice, it was from, Councillor Dean and, Jason at the time. I see you've met Dick and it didn't sound like much happened. Is that disappointing or is that?
Sorry, Megan, thank you.
Through the chair, the meeting was, you could say disappointing. However, we've revisited the situation and I think as a team, our staff are looking at how we can approach the matter differently. And yeah, we'll be providing more information to council on that matter.
So in other words, it's still alive. It's a fairly important matter and one we knew would never be easy to solve. Anything further, Colin? Councillor Colin? And thanks a lot, Megan. That was a good response for that. Back to the reports for information. We're on to 10.2, the offset scheme and fund under the Planning and Development and Infrastructure Act. Councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Peter.
Yes, I have a question. Any funds that are levied for approval for car parking into the fund, what is the fate of those monies?
Thanks, Councillor Peter. I'll pass to Craig.
Through the chair, yeah, thanks for the question, Councillor Peter. The fund was set up for the intent for those sorts of contributions to be used to provide car parking in the designated area. So the intent would be that property be acquired or property that council has be developed using those funds for car parking purposes. Without getting technical, the changeover to the new system under the PDI Act has meant that it's advantageous to have a scheme established together with the fund to have more clarity around that. And that's the intent essentially of suggesting that as a way forward. But in terms of the previous system, certainly it was set up with that intent.
Thank you, Craig. Further questions, councillors? Councillor Simon?
I have a question, just to understand this properly. So the way it sits right now, we do have a fund, but without an accompanying scheme, as you said, and the way it looks is, it says here that further contributions may only be made by agreement from persons wishing to undertake development. So at this point, the council can't require anyone to put anything in there. So as it sits right now, it's a bit pointless, it seems. So my question is, we would need, and as you mentioned, there's no actual way, there's no way to either wind up or like no prescribed, so the process of winding up this fund. And it doesn't seem, it hasn't and never been done to set up a new one either. So I'm just wondering, what is the opinion of you, of the planning department, of the usefulness of a fund as it sits, and should we actually, which way would you think is better to go, to get rid of it completely or establish a fund with a scheme?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Simon.
Yeah, thank you, through the chair. Thank you, Councillor Simon. Look, there's a few questions in what you just asked, but in terms of the legacy fund and the matter of potential contributions being on the basis of an agreement, yes, if a developer has a shortfall in car parking they're required to deliver, the legacy fund, as I've called it in the report, exists as an opportunity to say, well, I'm short X number of car parks, I'm prepared to contribute to that fund, with the intent that those funding contributions would then be used for car parking provision by council. Yes, it's a gap in the legislation that has allowed these funds to carry over without the requirement for a scheme. And it's also a bit of a gap, I think it's fair to say, that you can have them continue in the form, but not be able to be modified or wound up even. The opportunity to effectively replace with a scheme and fund by going through a process exists there to effectively replace it with a scheme that would allow for the requirement that you mentioned there in terms of if there is a shortfall or other matter that fits within the scheme, you can say to a developer, potential applicant, look, it doesn't meet this criteria. Under the scheme, you would be required to do that. Now, this is an addendum to the report. I wrote this without at a point in time, but since completing the agenda item, I've had advice from the department that they are working on some guidelines, but they are probably a couple of months away. So my intent is that once they're to hand, I'll be able to provide another report which will give a bit of direction around this and something that we can get a bit of an idea of costs, and we can look at what it would involve to replace or look at an updated version of this scheme. And something, in fact, that we might be able to look that's more broadly applied, given this one was only ever established for Kapunda. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. So in other words, if someone was going to put a developed application in now that required them to provide parking facilities, what would be the outcome of that?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Bill. Look, through the chair, the same process would apply. An applicant would be provide their application and be assessed against the planning and design code requirements. So that's right. So if there's a shortfall in car parking that it means that the application can't be supported, that would be the recommendation and the process that the planners would determine in terms of making their judgment on the application. If an applicant in that situation said, look, I acknowledge that the car parking is deficient in terms of code requirements, but I'm prepared to make a contribution to offset that, they can still do that with the legacy fund. The gap is that, for the reasons outlined in the report, having a scheme is much more advantageous. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Craig. Councillor Michael.
Thanks, Mayor Bill. So just to clarify, the report here says at the penultimate bullet point on the second page, a person may be required to contribute into a fund. So is it may or must, and how is the difference between may or must determined and by who?
Yeah, so through the chair, my understanding is at the point in time we are for the legacy fund, it's a choice. If the scheme is prepared in such a way, it can be a requirement. That's the difference as I understand it. One of the advantages is having that as a requirement if there is a deficiency. I'd have to look at the express wording though.
That's okay. And just as a follow-up question then, so who determines what the contribution amount should be?
Yeah, so through the chair again, look, that's a question that would come down to the scheme that's prepared. So that would be through council in terms of what it proposes to the minister, but the minister would need to accept and approve that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And these are the questions of a process that we're looking to understand more in terms of the guidance that we're seeking.
Councillor Dean.
Thank you, Mayor Bill. Craig, in the my recollection of various developments we've had in Kapunda, the number of car parks has always been an issue. And there seems to be that there's a formula for various kinds of retail or whatever, about how many car parks you need based on square metres of retail or whatever it might be. And they don't seem to take into account the fact that in smaller country towns, the number of car parks you need is probably less than the number you might need in an urban environment. And the consequence of that is that it just makes the problem a lot harder because you've got to provide more car parks than probably you need. There's usually some horse trading around that. The Foodland, for example, we currently have, has got a very large number of car parks, and I've only ever seen that almost full once, and that was when they sprung that sudden lockdown on us, and at 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and everyone and his dog went down there to stock up for this long lockdown that didn't happen, basically. And then there was still would have been a dozen or so car parks not full. So that just compounds the problem, in my view, in terms of the fact that the developer who might be able to provide, say, 10 car parks when the formula says 20, you get a little bit of horse trading about maybe reduce it a bit, but that's what's seen, I think, often as unfair. because it's unrealistic. And is in this changes, is there an opportunity there to address that issue?
Thanks, councillor Dean.
Right. Yeah, look, thank you. Through the chair again. Planning officers, of course, are required to apply the code in their assessment. Understand what you're saying about the on-street supply being the alternative. The on-street supply isn't assigned. So there is the potential that on-street supply, if it's relied upon, can be effectively allocated a number of times. And that's going to depend where you are. But we are in an era now where the code is the code and it's applied across the state. So we don't have that local policy opportunity. Look, it's difficult for me to comment on what a scheme might look like, given we don't have one to base that on at the moment. The guidance will be an interesting point here. But yeah, I'm loath to say that a planning officer would be within their remit to say, well, it requires 20, but we'll allow 10 unless there's very good reason. And some of that reasoning can be if there's shared parking arrangements. You look at when the hours of operation might apply, and you might say, well, some are used during the day and another use might require them at night, that type of thing. You can apply some logic to that in terms of the process on a particular site, as an example. But yeah, in terms of the code, they are duty bound in their assessment to apply what that says. And that yeah, has evolved a bit in the transition from development plans, but it's also been standardised. So that's the factor there as well.
Thank you, Craig. That's Colin.
Yeah, I'd just like to, I've had an email from a person who's actually trying to do a development in the old Udunda Farmers supermarket area. And they've been told they're going to have to pay $77,000 into the car parking fund. They want 3,900, or we as council want 3,950 per car park. They worked it out because it's 300 square metres. So that's how they've come up with the amount. They might be able to apply to get some taken off, but considering, and the dentist is going to go in the other part, I think they're not having to pay as much because there is some parking already there. But I just think it's crazy that in a main street like Kapunda, where we could be expecting to pay a developer, and if they put a retail shop there, they wouldn't be paying anything because it wouldn't be a change of use.
No.
So it just seems to me how dumb it is that, and in 2017, I don't think we're pretty silly to put it in and only in Kapunda. So I think we should be trying to find a way to get out of it rather than encourage it, because I think that it's very poor. You know, these country towns are having enough trouble keeping shops open as it is. And then you slug something like that. So they're not even going to continue with this development anymore. So if this is what's going to happen, it's quite disappointing.
Was that the reason they're not going to continue, Colin? Councillor Colin?
That's the only reason why it's not going to continue.
Oh, yeah, that's frightening. I don't know quite what the answer is, though. I suppose people have got to park somewhere, and you know, we understand there's only so much parking in the main street, but many people, like you've rightly said, you know, in a small shop, they've had to pay nothing if they're already there.
Well, it was previously a supermarket, and it did, and Mo's Baker was on one end, and it didn't have any parking requirement then. And it's going to be a 24-hour. The proposal's a 24-hour gymnasium, so the people will be going there, you know, not at the same, or some will go at the same time as the dentist, but you know, you can park around the corner, you can park down in the street, the RSL, and walk up. There's a lot of parking that I believe is available for a business like this without making them pay a very high fee. So I think we should be looking at a way that we're not charging it.
Councillor, is there an appetite for what Councillor Collins saying there? Because it seems to me it makes a lot of sense, and we can't afford to not have these business houses and having big shops like the Foodworks location empty. It's been empty for a couple of years, and if we keep this plan going as we seems like we have to, it's going to be empty for another couple of years.
Well, if you're going to charge 77,000, that site won't be developed. And I think the dentist is, because there are car parks behind it. I think the dentist must be using those, but they're not getting the It just, yeah, so.
So I might pass back to Craig if he's got any advice that we might be able to latch on to be able to put something to the Department of Planning.
Yeah, and thank you, Mayor Bill, and through the chair. Look, I have some familiarity with this, and I believe it comes down to timing. So I think from what I understand, the dental consulting room change in land use was the first tendency, which again allowed for the car parking on site, the limited number there next to what was Mo's Bakery to be assigned that way. As Councillor Ross has pointed out, the assessment allocated a certain number of car parking for the change in use to a gymnasium or fitness facility, as I understand it's now called in the code. And the advice back was, yeah, there may be some, that would be as a standalone use, but there may be some ability for that number to be reduced if there's a traffic advice assessment that says, well, it's not going to be a conflict between the hours when those things are used. And Councillor Collin alluded to that with 24 hours versus the dental surgery.
So I see.
But look, the choice to contribute to the fund, as I mentioned earlier in the present scheme, is a choice. Planning assessment will still need to judge the car parking deficiency and whether the application can be considered favourably with such a thing in the result. And we're not in the position as council to determine or advise the planning officers of how to regard that matter. They're delegated separately under separate legislation in that respect. So my understanding is that Kyron has also had some input to this in terms of potentially looking at ways forward to work through options for this business to be realised in Kapunda. But simply saying that the development shouldn't contribute or not be required to contribute would be to say that it's a matter of choice at the moment. And we can't say that the requirement of car parking should be discounted because it's a planning consideration. I just need to caution council in that respect because.
What about the amount per car park? Can that be negotiated?
Well, again, that's something we've had in terms of the policy position that we had. That was already discounted. Sorry?
$5 a car?
Well, the policy was, as it was established when it went through and was gazetted, I don't think we have the opportunity to revise that now. If you might recall, again, this is the flaw in the legislation as I understand it. We had a change that wasn't gazetted at the time when we went from 37.50 to 39.50 per car parking space. Admittedly, at the time when the policy was adopted, the recommendation could have been double that in terms of factoring in land values and development costs at the time. But because that wasn't gazetted, we reverted that back to the 37.50 number, to the earlier consideration. I don't believe we have a provision now to say that that be reduced to a nominal amount. I'm sorry.
So local council's got no control.
Yeah,
over
I'll have to think on that.
its own land.
Haven't it?
So the local council basically has no control over how this amount of money is allocated. Doesn't seem right.
No, we're talking about the requirement for a payment if there is a shortfall of car parking. The
But
council
we're talking
does.
about the amount now. We know that you've got to put something in, you've got to put your hand in your pocket. But I wonder how much OTR put in for their facility on, which is, basically opposite this particular facility. I mean, that's the bit that's sort of.
Well, again,
There's only two people paid in the fund, and that the two people paid in the fund were Mo Baker and Andrew Teagle for the chemist shop. And the other thing that disappoints me when they get told if they think it's a significant amount, you're not happy with the amount, we've told them to engage a traffic consultant to calculate how many dentist car parks. So they're told to get a traffic consultant. Like any small business just reads this and goes, see you later.
Yeah, I think it's something that needs to stay on our agenda for a little bit. Councillor Simon.
I do have a question because there was a very similar case that happened in Gawler with the Exchange Hotel. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but they wanted to add 100 more occupants, and that triggered an additional 30 car parks, and that would have cost them, I think it's about $8,000 per car park there. So you can do the math. So it's like $300,000 or something, or 250,000, and they were like, that's not worth having extra 100 occupants for that sort of money, plus all the staffing and all that. So what happened there is that it was quite a lengthy thing, but what it came down to was exactly what you guys mentioned, is to the amount. So the gazetted amount in Gawler it was $8,000 or thereabouts, but it wasn't gazetted at that amount. It was gazetted up to that amount. So I'm just wondering, and then in the end, common sense prevailed, and they went to like $300 per car park, and everybody went happy, merry way. So I was just wondering, if, in our case, if it's defined as that amount, or is it up to that amount, or is there some liberty, as we talked about, to reduce that, because that's what happened in Gawler.
Yeah, thank you, councillor Simon. Is there any way that we can object to our current position, and how would we do that? We are able to.
Through the chair.
Our common sense would suggest that we should be able to.
Through the chair, we didn't do an up to amount, but I'm just looking at the Gazette notice now. It said it will be a number. So unfortunately, we didn't build in that flexibility. And to your question, Mayor Bill, look, I'm not seeing a way that we can add flexibility after the fact here. We've gazetted and publicly stated a number previously, admittedly.
That was a long time ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was February 2017.
2017.
Yeah, when we first established this, tied in with that. Yeah, I've not looked at that question before.
No. Could we perhaps, drill down a little bit within the department to find out what options we may have, if there are any, and if there aren't any, why aren't there? I mean, surely goodness common sense needs to prevail on some of these things. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. No, I understand.
Sure, if you told Peter Malinowskis that, he would say the same thing.
Yeah, it's probably more of a legal question, in fairness. But again, if we're not able to make adjustments to, like, if we're mind to raise the fee, don't know that we can reduce it. I think we're caught, would be my gut feel.
So in other words, if we didn't have a fee at all, we'd be okay.
Oh, look, in terms of the fund, there needs to be a requirement for a fee to be nominated at the time it was gazetted, definitely. But because we built in a fee at a level, that's it for perpetuity. We are captured by that situation.
But what if we wanted to change our mind and we didn't want to have a fund?
That's what I'm saying. The legislation hasn't allowed, unfortunately, for a wind-up provision.
Gee,
It's a gap. I'm opening.
Look, don't start a war. It's never end. Yeah, Councillor Con.
So if we charge the money, so at the moment we haven't got a fund. So the money just goes into general revenue and then it just sits there and the council uses it to their discretion. So why can't we just get the money and then give it back as a economic development payment or something like that?
Through the chair, we still have a fund. It's the legacy fund, as I've described it in the report. And it still has that purpose.
But it's not set aside though, is it? It's just a fund that, so the money actually at the moment sits there and it's not actually allocated to the car park. So the money goes into general revenue, doesn't it?
That goes into the fund, which is part of our chartered accounts. Yeah.
But once it's in the fund, you can't pay it out to
So the express purpose is to pay it out for car parking. I don't think you could run the line of them returning it, if you would. Because you're taking it for a purpose, so yeah, I don't see you'd be able to then return it simply straight away.
Well, the main street's going to look pretty dead for a long time, isn't it?
We've got a bit of work to do. Councillor Michael?
Yeah, so thanks, Matt Bills. It seems to me between the rate that we apply on commercial property, which we discussed at the last, over our deliberations at the budget, and then superimposing what seems to me a disproportionate obligation on, given where we are, and to pay, was it $7,500, $8,000 a park or something? You said $37.50 per car park is a disincentive to people, right? So it seems a little bit counterintuitive to me that, notwithstanding that we might have gazetted this policy, and I understand your position in the sense that we've gazetted, we're going to do something, and it's a bit difficult for us to change that. But certainly, we should be able to obtain some legal advice on our ability to now gazette some other new regime that's more equitable, more reasonable, more reflective of where we are.
Yeah, look, through the chair, that's the point. Because the Development Act has been repealed because the Plan Development Infrastructure Act is in place. We're limited by the bounds of that. It hasn't included the ability for these legacy funds to be varied, and gazetting something without that legislative basis wouldn't, we wouldn't have cause to or ability to do that. I have sought advice on that previously when I prepared the earlier report around the car parking fund, because these were, important questions in and around what our options are and the flexibilities that we might have or otherwise. We're caught, unfortunately, as it turns out, by limitations in the legislation. Now, if there was ability for those to be updated, and that is a question for the state government, Mayor Bill, that could assist with providing a way forward for some of these legacy fund situations. It's something that a few councils, I understand, are starting to explore, hence the guiding advice which is coming. The way forward, as I've been advised, is to look at replacing the legacy fund. It doesn't get wound up, it just gets superseded by something which comes in its place. And we have guiding advice on how to do that.
So as part of replacing the legacy fund, then does that give council the ability to then set a new regime around parking fees?
Yeah, you'd be able to determine a scheme and a fund combined. The scheme would inform how the fund is applied.
Yep.
You could have a look at the number that you apply to a car parking deficiency on a per space basis. But the legacy fund would be superseded. You no longer use it because you put a replacement in its place, which arguably, from what I understand, is superior under the PDI Act because it has a scheme to it that can be modified as you need to. All subject to the agreement of the minister that I qualify it because it's not just a council decision.
So where does the money from the legacy fund go?
Well, that would still be required to be discharged for car parking in the designated area if you're keeping to the policy and what we had in terms of the originally gazetted fund.
So then just returning to your report. So this is a report for information.
Yeah.
So at what point is council asked to make a decision about establishing the new scheme?
Yeah, well, it goes back to the report the council considered in May. I foreshadowed that I'd prepare another report. I just don't have quite all the information to give council guidance.
Okay.
This is and there was a requirement to report back to the council in July. This is simply saying we're at a point, I don't have all the information. I expect to in a couple of months. Based on what the department is telling me, that's subject to that coming through. But I understand there's been a few queries from councils around these questions and that they are starting to do some guiding or work on some guiding information.
Okay, thanks, Craig.
Craig, can we rely on your team to sort of really progress this a bit? Because obviously there's an appetite in the chamber to see change and to see, our some common sense sort of prevail in some of these decision making and some of the legislation that's there. It doesn't seem right. So if we could rely on that to get back to us with something that we can work with, and then we can work with some of the developers around the place that want to fill these shops up, but just don't have the capacity to pay $77,000 for a car parking fund. All right, well, thanks very much, everybody, for that. Is there any further questions in relation to this matter? And thanks, Craig, for taking it on the chin. You've had a lot of questions there, and you haven't had the opportunity to complete the report properly, so some of those questions would have been difficult to answer. But we'll rely on you to get the finished item, and we'll going for round two. Yep. Thanks very much, Craig. Councillors, if there's no more questions there, we move on to 10.3, which is a Freeling Railway Reserve activation opportunities. And I know this one's very close to Councillor Lynn's heart. Or was. There's a report prepared there by Darby Schultz, and it's a very comprehensive report and one I found very easy to read, and hopefully it's full of good news. Are there any questions, councillors, in relation to this matter?
For a moment, when we met with Chris Peters and went out and had a look, Karen and Darby and myself, we have and Craig, you came, did you? Yeah, no, you didn't come. No. We actually were shown these machines and they were, he had a good point that he would like some of these machines to come to us. They're enormous. Gavin Schuster has offered to, if we pick out one or two or three, he'll bring them, he'll go and get them. And I mean, he's got to get a big forklift and to bring them in. But one of them especially was the one that used to make the mouse traps. I was going to bring a mouse trap with me, but it's a round wire thing, and they were sold everywhere, all over Australia, and so it's a part of our history. Yeah. But we've got to just wait until Kyron might like to talk to it anyhow, to just say that I won't go out there again, but
I guess one of the decisions that we need to make as a council, because it says in here that prior to commencing further investigations, council staff would prefer to obtain direction from the council.
Yeah.
So I guess it's asking us to provide some direction.
Yeah.
What they want us to decide, whether we, Councillor Simon?
I mean, I'm no expert on any of these machines, obviously, but to me, there seems a few that are quite nice. Some of them look like big ugly monsters, in my opinion. So I'm not sure if we really want them on display. But I think if we just put a few nicer ones in the Freeling yard there and don't go too wild on museum style interpretation, all that sort of stuff, then I think that'd be a good outcome in the end.
Yes, I agree. I think, and Kyron would agree with that too, that we just get two or three, and Chris Peters he will give more information on written information so that we can put a plaque on and say this is what was the machinery that was used in Freeling from back to the 1800s. Yes.
Councillors, just to wrap this up, maybe the ward councillors and the staff work together on coming up with a plan, because it seems that the appetite's there to do it, but there's a bit of concern about some of the size of some of the plant equipment and perhaps some of the location. But if we leave it to the ward councillors who get responsible to the residents in that area and the staff, we could probably get a good outcome.
I think Darby will come back with another report once it's been worked out. Okay.
Absolutely
Happy with
correct.
that, councillors, or any further questions? Or any questions? Oh, Darby, you're online.
Yeah, I just said to Lynette's comments, Councillor Lynette's comments, definitely we will come back with a report for decision with a bit more information once we've undertaken those investigations. So happy with that response from the table.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I think the ward councillors are probably in the best position to move things along a bit quicker too than need to come back to a full council meeting each time. So thanks everybody for that. Thanks you, Darby. Well, if you're satisfied with that, councillors, no more questions or anything else, we'll move on to 10.4. And I must say, I see Simon up in the back corner. No need to hide. This is an excellent report. Really, really happy with that. And it's answered a lot of questions, I'm sure, that council members have on this project over there. And I'm sure there'll be quite a few more questions also. But the report itself is excellent. It's a great body of work. And thank you, Simon. So I'll open it up for discussion. Any questions or comments, councillors? It dates back a little bit too, and one of the comments that I had to myself was I remember the time when the deeds were put together with all the landowners over there to oblige and deliver their developments in such a way that flood resists the Gawler Belt and not made any worse than the pre-development situation and the outcomes are. And they signed deeds to that effect. So most of us might not be aware of that, but I had the good fortune of being aware of it because I was involved in the signatures. But that was a very, very strategic move at the time, because that's put the control in council's hands to be able to make sure that these landowners comply. So well done. And I think that might answer a few questions too as to what this you know, Roseworthy stormwater system is all about. That's what it's about. It's about the deeds. Correct me if I'm wrong, Simon, but it's about the deeds and about managing that water that comes off. Councillor Simon?
I was just wondering that there's a mention in there that we obviously, during the construction phase, there's going to be difficulties, and we've heard for a few years now that Towards Road is in a bad state of repair, and all the school buses going through there and all sorts of stuff. I'm just wondering, this is obviously creating a bit of a friction with the community. There's a lot of people quite unhappy, and I'm just wondering, I've mentioned these things prior. Is there a way that we can manage that better? I totally understand that this is how it's going to be. I just wonder what council could do to, I don't know if there's some better marketing that we could do, or better managing those expectations, or just make sure that people understand what's going to be. Otherwise, it drives this bad image of council, which I think is very detrimental to what we do, because we're doing good work and we're trying our best and everything. But the vision out there is like, oh, council, blah blah blah, sort of stuff. And we really want to try to avoid that and see if we can, somehow do better. Just on the management side, like, I mean, as in management expectations and marketing and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think most of the developments in the state will be being hit with the same sort of problems that we've got. I don't think there's any doubt about that, but never mind. On the money.
Yeah, through the chair, I think on the 18th of August we've got our first of elected member staff road trips. It'll be a great opportunity to showcase a range of things across the area, including going through there. And I'm sure there'll be some great engagement on the bus as to how we can communicate those sorts of things. And I think in that relaxed environment, I'm sure we can all put our heads together and come up with the right approach of communicating it out there. So thanks for that.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Richard. I think that might solve a few problems, Councillor Simon. If we can all get out there all at the same time, and we can see the problems with our own eyes and see what outcomes we think might improve matters there. Obviously, it's going to be ongoing. There's always going to be something that someone's going to disagree with, but we've got to do our best to make sure that that's as narrow as possible. So I think the bus trip's a good start. But if you have any better ideas, look, let us know.
I mean, the bus trip is a great idea. I'm not sure if that's really going to address the community. Like, I mean, hopefully, maybe we can come up with some good strategies.
We've got to know what the problem is, and we've got to see it with our own eyes to know what that is, to be able to address it.
Seen it and heard it. Like, we've got emails and pictures, and I think we know what the problems are. So, just wondering if this could be better maintenance, or if we can get the developers to do better, or just the community is sort of quite unhappy, and we just need to make them come along the trip a bit better, like take them along and say, like, look, we're going to be doing everything we can, and it's going to be good, and we do better. Like I said, it's a hard thing to do, but just in general, we need to manage expectations better, and the community, that they like us more. I think this is very important.
All right, Councillor Collin, one more question, we might move on.
How far away are we before we punch it in a hole? Are we going to put it down the aquifer, or how far away is that?
That's a good question. I can't answer that. Byron?
Yeah, through the chair, I think the report mentioned that most of the basins that exist at the moment are scheduled to be connected and taking water from them before next winter. Yeah.
Further questions, councillors? If not, thanks again, Simon, for an excellent report, and it certainly raised a few eyebrows too with what's going on over there as well. So we do need to listen and act where we can. 10.5 in principle support for the ultimate handover of Lake at William Lakes, Roseworthy. Another excellent report. Are there any questions, councillors?
Mr. Mayor, just a comment from me, if I may. It seems amazing that we can get a lake there, and and they're going to, I would assume, in some of them to pump a fair bit of water from somewhere to fill it up and keep it maintained. feed the mosquitoes and sort of thing. So I'll be fascinated to watch it actually occur and happen. So
It's going to be bigger than Davison Reserve.
it's huge. It's huge. We had a ski boat races, but we had to aerate it.
Councillor Michael.
So just a maybe a point of clarification, please, Mayor Bill or Simon. So if I understand correctly, what this report is saying is that the lakes that will be developed as part of this development are to be handed over to council at some point. And then there's this interface with the Bunyip scheme. And so my question is, what obligations from a cost point of view is council inheriting by taking over the basin? Is there a net benefit to council? I know it talks about net present value and, you know, I don't know, it's a bit complicated because they own the lifestyle centre or whatever they called it. How does that play out? Where's the benefit to council in doing this? I guess is what it boils down to.
Yeah, understand the question.
Thanks, Ryan. Yep.
Yeah, through the chair. So as we've been in discussions with Villawood for a while now, pretty much as soon as they put a sign up saying William Lakes, we've been in discussions as to what that means, given that we don't have a lot of lakes across the council at the moment. So I guess the main concern from an operational perspective is pest control, water quality management, and top-up requirements for such a significant water body and the costs associated with that. So we've really asked Villawood to put together what those costs would be. We have reviewed that. We had an independent engineer have a look at it and compare it with other lakes, water bodies across the state to get a real handle on what is typically needed to sustain those types of entities and what the costs are. And there is an additional cost to the authority that takes them on board, which would be council. So those costs could be anywhere up to about $130,000 a year. That if lakes don't exist, that's an additional cost. So what we've been able to do is compare that to, if it weren't lakes, it would be open space in another form, potentially irrigated landscaping, gardens, turf, those sorts of things, and looked at the cost difference between those two for council to maintain and compared that to what we expect would be additional rate revenue due to capital valuation uplift from the dwellings that surround the lake. So there is some evidence that living next to lakes brings with a capital valuation increase. So we've looked at the research around that, which suggests that the property uplift would be anywhere between sort of 2 and 4%, which for a capital valuation of around $500,000, which is sort of what we're getting at St. Eves at the moment, means that each property would pay an extra $60 a year in rates. Multiply that across the development, and you've got additional revenue of about $100,000. So when you look at the cost difference between lakes versus landscaping, that difference is about 40,000, or I think it was actually might have been 60,000, which means that there's a net benefit to the council in terms of in just a financial context. So that doesn't analyse the net benefit associated with greening and cooling and those sorts of things. So that's sort of what the analysis that we did to satisfy ourselves that financially the council shouldn't be any worse off with lakes. Obviously, there's still some challenges around maintaining that and getting ourselves ready in terms of resources and skills and experience to deal with those. Hence, there'd be a recommendation that there's conditions around timeframes for the developer to operate the lakes and train staff and hand over.
Okay.
Kyron, is there any opportunity to perhaps put a special rate on that area?
Well, through the chair, that's completely at the council's discretion. Those mechanisms exist under the Local Government Act. So, I mean, I think over time that's certainly something that the council consider if actuals are different to, the estimates that we've looked at the moment. We've sort of put those estimates through some sensitivity analysis. So increased and decreased them just to see if what sensitivity there is around that. But yeah, certainly that's an option for the council in the future.
So that was a good explanation. Thanks, Kyron. So my question though then is, who ultimately owns the residents club? And on that basis, presumably if it's the developer, why wouldn't they retain the lake and the attendant maintenance obligations that go with it? And then we still achieve the capital uplift.
It's an interesting question, that one, through the chair. We haven't gone into the legalities around what options exist for owning and operating lakes. I guess at some point a developer exits a site. There's certainly some sort of model around a community facility there that we haven't seen I haven't seen the details around the how that's going to work. And the ownership model. What I can say is that the lakes are intrinsically connected to the stormwater management system, which would sit with the council to operate and maintain. So there is an interface there. They do form multiple functions, not just ornamental. So part of the catchment is certainly directed towards them. In that sense, it would rest with council as a stormwater management function.
I think what I'll add to that as well is that just like the Pines Reserve, it is a reserve for all people in South Australia and certainly for the enjoyment of all Light Regional Council residents. Having a water body that was connected only with the facility that they're planning to build would actually limit it to the William Lakes area, which is the area bounded by Kangaroo Flat, Twarts and Horrocks Highway. And I think for the enjoyment of all Light Regional Council residents, and including those ones in St Ives and the Hickenbotham areas, this will be a premium location where people will want to sort of wander beyond just, those residents who are in the area. So I think that in itself will, in my view, make this, will be one of the things that really does uplift the area. So
one final question then. So thanks. So yeah, both really good explanations. So then does this add to the capital value of the Bunyip scheme?
No.
Through the chair, just on something that Councillor Close said about mosquitoes, when we put the wetlands in at Freeling, I went to the professor in the University of Adelaide, and he, Dr. Mike Cocken, and he told us to go to the native fish species and get a supply of big-headed gudgeon fish. And I live right near there, and we don't have any mosquitoes at all, none. And that's why, because when the lake or the wetlands dried up, they went down into the soil and they came back out again. Yeah. And it might be a good point to point out that they could go to the native fish species people and get them.
Thanks, Councillor. That's interesting. Councillor Simon?
I do have one more question about this. So we're obviously not the first council to do such a thing. Like Salisbury is famous for it, and there's all sorts of other. How much do we work together? I mean, they would have worked up these schemes, that these handover schemes and all these contracts and all this sort of stuff. They would have lots of experience in exactly that. So how much have we talked with these people? Have we asked these people how they're doing it? Can we see their contracts and their stuff? Like, I think a certain form of cooperation will probably be really good. So has that happened already, or are we going to do that?
Yeah, through the chair. So we regularly catch up with City of Playford in particular to talk new developments and the challenges that come with them. So we've had those conversations. I guess we're probably not at the level of detail with this particular lake design where we would then talk detail with them on how they manage their particular lakes. So I think that's probably a step that's still to come in terms of detail. And I think this report is really just, I guess, really brief the council that there's certainly lakes being proposed by the developer, and there's probably no reason not to accept them at this point in time, but there's certainly a bit of detail that we would condition on a planning consent to ensure that T's are crossed and I's are dotted. And as part of following up on those conditions with detailed design, I think we'd definitely engage with other councils to ensure that what they're proposing is conventional and achievable, and hasn't got any surprises.
Thank you, Corin. Anything further, councillors? If not, we'll move on. We have a recommendation. Oh, thanks, Councillor Lynn. Page 27 is a recommendation that the reports and information be received and the contents herein noted by the council. Would someone like to second that? Councillor Simon. Any questions, councillors, or comments? If not, I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you, councillors. We move on now to our reports for decision. First one, 11.1, is the Christmas opening hours. Are there any questions, councillors, or any updates since this report has been published? Pepper, nothing?
Ground. I couldn't quite work that out. Last year, it was they went from 9th of December and from 4 p.m. on the Friday. Is that a wrong date in there, or it's the second paragraph in the background?
Yeah, so I can answer that one. That was the staff recognition event last year that we had on the 9th, so it was a half-day closure. And then there was, instead of closing at 12 on the sort of last business day before Christmas, we only closed at 4 p.m. So that's why the sort of split there. There was a half-day closure on the 9th of December, and then just closed at 4 p.m. to allow for that sort of administration close up.
Okay.
Then.
Thank you, Pepper. Any further questions, councillors? And doing a wonderful job down at that library too. It's great. We've got a recommendation about halfway down the page. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Michael? Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ellison? Any further discussion, councillors, or comments? If not, I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour, those against, that's carried. Thank you, councillors, and thank you, Pepper, for your report. Moving on now to 11.2, the Kapunda Country Chick Craft Incorporated. We have a recommendation about halfway down page 31. Are there any updates or reports to update this particular report? No. Thanks, Councillor Lynn. Councillor Dean. Are there any questions, councillors, in relation to this report? If not, I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Those against? I'm carried. And I think if anyone's had the opportunity to go into that little craft shop, it's just wonderful. It's as good a craft shop as you would probably see anywhere. We've done well. And they look after our hall here in Kapunda. They've even produced a brochure on the hall. 11.3, the Buckvalley Cemetery Interment Rights. We have a recommendation on page 34. Are there any updates on this particular matter? If not, any questions? Councillor Michael, Councillor Ellison, any questions or comments, councillors?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor. My comment. I stopped again today and had another look at it. I've been there several times. It's a fascinating piece of history of the German settlement there. The ex-Kinger, the family, but there's a lot of Winkles there. A lot of Winkles on that cemetery there. So it'd be sad for those families not to be able to continue using that area. So I think it's probably pretty important. You may note that the bridge across the Gawler River on the road into Gawler, what used to be the main road. That's called the Wingle Bridge.
That's right.
And it used to be a fun kids for on their Friday nights. They'd go and put a T in front of it.
Oh, cheeky.
But I certainly support the recommendation.
Thank you, councillor Bill. Councillor Simon?
Yeah, I second councillor Bill's comments. I just wondered, so it's just talking about 3 plots. We're just extending it for 3 plots, or just indefinite for their families?
Thank you, Megan.
Through the chair, the plots there's only 3 plots, correct? Because the interments are for ashes only. There'll be no bodily remains. And the 3 will be plenty for what they've told us they need.
Well, I have a mover and a seconder. If there's no further questions, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you, councillors. I'll make your residents down there pretty happy. The ward all about.
Only the dead ones, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah. Gee, I left myself wide open for that one. 11.4, we have signage at Wasley's, and we have a recommendation about halfway down page 39. Are there any further updates on this particular matter since the report was published? If not, do we have any questions, councillors? If not, would someone like to move the recommendation? Councillor Michael, would someone like to second that? Councillor Allison? So no further questions or comments. I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you, councillors. Out the road. And that's an excellent report too. That was Jason Winter. Thought it might have been yours, Jason. Different Jason. Summary of community ward project submissions. And this is a really, really excellent sort of outcome. I don't think any of us in our wildest dreams would have expected we'd have got the outcomes that we have. I don't know if you've had any chance to look through the appendices of the attachments there to see that the number of projects that have been put forward, and it's really drawn things out of the community that are going to be very valuable. And it's an interesting exercise now, of course, because we'll have to put our pen to the ones we want to see proceed at our next council meeting. But this recommendation here is just a report in relation to that matter. I don't know if there's any further updates to this report. There's nothing further. Are there any questions, councillors, in relation to it? Councillor Michael?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Bill, and I agree. I think the response to it has been really good. So probably more just a procedural question around how we do propose to deal with it in the next session, because I mean some of these proposals or requests aren't costed. For example, I think there's over 60 or 70 of them. Not sure how we go about discussing it within the confines of our rigid meeting procedures, but I guess I wanted to just have a chat about how we might go about it in the next.
Yeah, I'd recommend we have a workshop once we've got the details and that they've distilled all the information and have a report in front of us. We take it to a workshop then to decide how we're going to take that next step, where it's a bit more casual at a formal council meeting. Richard, you might have something to add to that.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Bill. No, I hadn't proposed a workshop, that's for sure. It's going to be enough to, we've got 3 weeks between tonight and the finalisation of the next agenda. So it'd be fair to say the staff have got a fair bit on their plates with this. They're all excellent submissions. That was the great thing. Clearly, we won't be funding them all. Some of them are projects that the elected body would only consider as part of the annual business plan itself because they're just so big. We've given a first cut to it already. We clearly didn't want to put that into the agenda. What we wanted in the agenda tonight was just what we received. And as I say, I think there's a lot of excellent stuff in there, to be honest. We will go through it. There'll be a number of matters that, in my view, get dealt with as part of our capital program, and we will go through and we will work out what that is, what it isn't. But I think it's, I'm pretty comfortable that what will get presented to elected members will be items that I think you'll be quite comfortable in funding, to be honest. That said, I think you can read in there that there are projects that we just wouldn't be able to fund, because we will end up with, I think it's probably about 10 months to deliver them. And some of these do need to be worked up, and that's what staff will do in the next 3 weeks, is contacting the people, really understanding what it is about the projects they're going to want, and we'll go from there. But what I would suggest is that if there are projects in there that you see that you go, I like it, I don't like it, contact myself, send an email, circulate them around amongst yourselves, include the general management team, and I think that will be the quickest way around it. We will try and align it as best we can with our current strategic plan, though, and I say that as best we can. But in my view, I think what we're going to see is achieving Councillor Michael's original intent, which is getting some money into the community and to some of those community groups to help them continue. Thank you.
Richard, I just don't want to be cheeky, but sending an email around, some of council members will do that, others won't. So the full council basically is not getting a chance to sort of assess these projects themselves. That's going to be done for us.
Yep, that's correct. That's the role of staff, will be to assess these and make recommendations to the elected members. And those recommendations, I think you'll see, will be pretty clear about what we can and can't do. I mean, as an example, I don't believe that it will be in council's remit to install a $500,000 recycled water scheme at Greenock. And I think there's no point meeting to workshop that. So, you know, I think my view is the majority of these projects are actually going to, be funded. And as I say, they are the ones that it is obvious can be funded.
Well, that's a different matter if most of them are going to be funded. I was suspecting that maybe a lot of them wouldn't be, and we would have no option to understand that, other than decisions already been made.
So through the chair, when will we get your cut of them? Before August, when will we get your cut?
18th, 15th of August.
Okay.
The recommendations come to the elected members. As I say, if you've got some that you go waste of money, tell us and we'll look at it and we'll give consideration. But our view is we've got a lot of information from the community, and I think it's every submission will be assessed and provided commentary on to be either dealt with immediately or dealt with in the future.
Once we've received that, Richard, would we have the ability to be able to add to that and subtract from that list?
The decision will be with the elected members.
So we can add or subtract, and that would come to them. The list will come to the meeting for adoption. Yeah. Councillor Collins.
Question done by council, so evened up between the three wards, is that, or it's just purely on the merit of what's been submitted?
A good question.
I know there has been some looking at that, but at the end of the day, I wouldn't want to see wards disadvantaged by having funding taken away because another ward actually had less funding. So I think there's good projects right throughout, whether they can all be funded, because I mean, I'll raise an example. We're not building a playground in 10 months. Okay, as an example, we're just not. You might add a piece of equipment somewhere, but you're not building a playground. It won't happen. We've already got a full program. So to take another program and overlay that on top of an existing one, do design, do procurement and get it in on the ground, it won't happen. So And we need to consider those and go, do they just form part of the bigger IAMP and part of our bigger open space strategies? So we want to get money out there, but we don't want to waste money either.
That makes sense. So in other words, we've got to deliver these projects within this financial year, in this council year.
Oh, hang on, I want to ask a question. Just want to
That's
ask a
Alison.
question, thanks. Just through the chair for Richard. Will we see the not so go ahead list as well?
Yeah, what you'll see is a complete list of what you're seeing tonight
Yep.
with commentary
Mhm.
in terms of what will happen with those projects. So as I say, from memory looking through it, there won't be a project that is a complete no. It will be a project that we actually need to look at, scope, and actually consider as part of a bigger program.
Oh, thanks, Richard. That's excellent news. It really is. And that restores my faith a little. I was a bit worried there for a while. Thank you. Councillors, if there's no further questions on this matter, there's a recommendation about halfway down page 46. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Dean? Oh, Lynette did. Second that, Councillor Dean. Any questions, councillors, or comments before we put this to the vote? If not, all those in favour? Those against, that's carried. We're moving on now to our strategic document review timeline. There's anything further to add to this report? Nothing further. Are there any questions in relation to this report, councillors? It's a little bit of housekeeping, I guess, but that's information we need to know. There's a recommendation about halfway down page 49. There's no further questions. I'll put the recommendation. Well, that's right. I want someone to move the recommendation, pardon me. Councillor Bill and Councillor Dean. Wow, nearly fell for that one. Any further questions or comments, councillors? If not, I put the recommendation. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thanks, councillors. Uh-huh. 11.7, bylaws review, miscellaneous amendment, bylaw number 7, amending bylaw. We have a big recommendation on page 54. Are there any updates on this report, Craig?
No, thank you through the chair.
Councillors, are there any questions in relation to this particular report? It's extremely in-depth and Councillor Simon?
I do have a question. Well, this is seems very complex. I don't fully understand it. There's been a cat incident in Rosebery, and yeah, that's beside the point. But there's some bylaws that would guide what should happen, what shouldn't happen. So some residents took it upon themselves to go to the police and ask them about the bylaws and what enforcement there could be. And then the police obviously laughed in their faces and said, like, these things shouldn't be called laws. So I'm just wondering how enforceable are these things? I mean, and it seems a very complex and complicated system to set up all these laws or these bylaws, which then afterwards you can't really enforce. So I'm just general comment on what's the point of it and how much we have to do, and could we just get rid of some and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Simon. Craig, sorry to go through this again.
No, that's okay. No problem at all. Through the chair. Look, thanks for the question. What's the value? Look, the council has the ability to go through this process to make bylaws for particular items affecting its area. They are enforceable. You might recall when we did the original making of these back last year that expiation fees are attached to them. So our authorised officers can undertake their investigations against the bylaws, much as they can against other delegated powers under various pieces of legislation. And where appropriate, they have enforcement mechanisms. But in fairness, SAPOL is not involved in administering council bylaws. But because of the nature of these, yes, there is this process of quite a legislated and step-by-step process to be achieved to go through and make a bylaw. And in this case, an amending bylaw to update the ones that were passed previously. So look, they have a place and they have a purpose and they are needed, is what I would say.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. I'm just going back to what Councillor Simon related to. I think there's a complication of some of these things here. These attachments at the top, these bylaws, do we really need them? National Competition Policy Report for Amendment Bylaw. What does that mean?
So through the chair, yes, look, that's a necessary part of the process. We are required to, in making our bylaws, have considered the impact or the likely or potential impacts of those, including advice from our solicitor. So all of the documentation there is required as part of this process.
Thanks for that. That's, you happy with that, Councillor Simon? That makes sense. Yep. All right, councillors, any further questions or comments in relation to that? If not, there's a recommendation on page 54. Would someone like to move that recommendation? That is a motion. Councillor Bill and Councillor Michael. Any further comments or questions, councillors? If not, I'll put the recommendation there on page 54. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thanks, Councillor. Thanks, Craig. I mean, I weren't trying to put you on the spot, but they do seem to get a bit above me, some of these planning matters.
No, Neville, that's fine. If I may, through the chair, there is an additional, not that we'll need to do something here, but in terms of the meeting minutes, we'll need to record that there was a 2/3 majority present, and that the writing from the room, the decision was unanimous as required. Yeah. So I'll highlight that as a procedural step.
I'll just pause for a moment.
No, thank you. Sorry, there's a bit of extra procedure in that must not be captured. I've got a printed copy for Richard to sign.
Oh, I see. This is the bylaw stuff.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's formalities here that
Yeah.
are part of the process.
No, it's fine. The bylaw, council. He has to do it in the council meeting, does he?
I'm going to do it in the meeting so I'll capture legislation.
Yeah.
So
It's been a bit cold in here tonight. It's nice to put the jackets on. Yeah. Oh, it's been a night. We're just about done, I think.
no, we're just doing a formality with the bylaws. There's a step that we need to capture in the minutes. That 2/3 of the council were present and the nature of the decision. It's tied in with the process. Well, I'm just going to duck next door and grab these printouts.
They're actually the sinking ship first.
Sorry about that, Mayor Bill.
It's okay.
You would have to, yeah.
He's going to get the form. Councillors, we can move back into our meeting procedures now. We've got a quorum. Yes, we do. 11.8 is our behavioural support policy. There's a recommendation about halfway down page 58. I don't suspect there are any further updates to this report since it was printed in the agenda. but I'll open it up for questions. Are there any questions in relation to this particular support policy? Basically, it's telling us from our last training session that this report's ready now to go out for public consultation. That's basically what it's telling us. Thanks, Councillor Lynn. Would someone like to second that recommendation? Councillor Ellison, are there any questions or comments, councillors, in relation to this? If not, I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour, those against, that's carried. Thanks, councillors. The delegation annual review. Wow, the CEO is going to be pretty busy in the next 12 months. if you've read the list, my God. Councillors, I don't suspect there are any further updates to this report since the agenda was published. I think, are there any questions, councillors, in relation to this, the delegation's annual review? Councillor Simon?
I do have another question. I suppose it will be for Craig again, and it's just because I don't understand it. That's not. I just wondered. So all these powers, so that the council as an elected body actually would have all these powers, and we are delegating it to anyone else. So to these, 200 or 300 pages of stuff, we as an elected body would technically have these powers, and by doing what we're doing, we're delegating this to the CEO and to everyone else. Wow, that's amazing. So reading this, there was one point in the recommendation that again, it's just a question. It says, where is it again? Delegate the powers of an assessment panel as a relevant authority under the Planning and Development and Infrastructure Act. I don't really understand it because I don't understand the powers of an assessment panel, but I was sort of under the impression the assessment panel is a completely separate thing from council. But this, to me, again, just shows my ignorance probably, but it seems to me that we would have the power and we delegate it to the assessment panel. But I always understood that the assessment panel is a completely separate thing and we don't have the power. So could we keep those powers if we wanted to?
So through the chair, we as council appoint our panel, as you know, but the panel and the assessment manager derive powers directly from the legislation. Council has separate powers that it derives from the legislation. So the delegations are complicated, if you could put it that way, by the fact that there are a few different hats being worn depending on the decision. So you need to be mindful of that. So the assessment manager delegates powers to, in this case, the staff, the planning officers. Council delegates powers to council staff for matters it has control over under the PDI Act. The assessment panel delegates powers as well to staff under this. But we don't delegate. What previously used to happen, without getting too complicated, is under the Development Act, yes, council delegated powers to the panel, and that's no longer the case. Or it's not the same, put it that way. But was there a particular one that you were looking at in the example that you mentioned, or?
I just wonder what were those powers? So what powers do we delegate to the assessment panel? And then the follow-up question would be, could we keep those powers? Because I'm just wondering, some contentious development comes up and then we sort of say that the development panel deals with that.
Yes.
But so that could be, I mean, I'm not saying that I want to, but is it possible that we could deal with that? Like,
no.
So what is that delegation?
No, look, through the chair, we don't have the ability to step in for the panel in terms of a planning matter or an application. The panel is an authority, a designated entity under the Act itself. Yeah.
So what is this delegation? What is this delegation then? This is really complicated. It's just over my head, probably.
No, all right. Let me come back to, I think you're looking at instrument B or C from that.
Number.
Oh, Carrie's saying she can answer me.
So it's number 7, delegate powers of an assessment panel.
Carrie, are you online?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Mayor Bill. Through the chair, Councillor Simon, it is a very good question that you have there. It is a bit of an odd one when it comes to the Planning Development and Infrastructure Act. Whilst we have to put it through council, ironically, under sections where it refers to the council assessment panel, it's a bit odd that we actually, it's not powers that council can keep themselves. It is actually delegated to the CAP, to the cap through the legislation. It is just a bit of an odd one that we still have to put it through council, through the framework, through the LGA.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carrie. It's getting back to my governance matter that I raised early in the meeting. I think we were just over-governed. Councillor Michael.
Thanks, Mayor Bill. Thanks, Carrie. So just a question that's sort of sticking in my mind when we were looking at a previous item. I can understand why the assessment panel would be a separate body. But my question is, so what role does council or its delegate play in determining things like minimum lot sizes, coverage ratios, setbacks? And where I'm going with this is, as a council, what influence do we have over the quality of development that occurs in this council area?
Christian? Yep, through the chair. In terms of the quality question, the policies that can be applied, we as council still have the ability to look at code amendments. But I'll say that with the next step being that those code amendments are to look at applying zoning that has gone through the state government. So we've lost that ability to have localised policy. It's simply a matter of a selection of the the code policy that's been prepared by the state government, and looking to a rezoning simply becomes a case of applying a different zone from the policy suite to the nominated area going through the process. We don't have the ability to adopt localised policy. There were technical variations that were adopted to marry up previous development plan policy with code zone policy. But that was a step of the process of transition. I'm not sure if that's been adopted or allowed since the code's been adopted in a formal way. Sorry if that doesn't quite answer the question. There has been a transition in that space.
Yeah, it sort of has. And look, I won't labour the point in the interest of time, but I guess, for example, intensive infill residential development with, blocks the size of postage stamps, 300, 400 square metre blocks, which are no doubt in the posts. So effectively what we're saying is, this elected body or the staff or the CEO has no ability to control what happens within the council area because the PDI or the code sets what those minimum requirements are, and the council just has to go along with it. Is that right?
Through the chair, I mean, it depends on the example we're talking about, obviously, but if you had let's say you use a residential zone example, which has an intensity, a minimum allotment size that council said, well, we think that it ought to be something different. Not that I'm suggesting we do this by any way, but if you take, for example, a master plan zone that applies to Roseworthy and say, well, actually, we think it should have been established neighbourhood, you'd have to go through a code amendment process and present a case that ultimately the minister would determine to do that. And in fact, you'd have to present the case to initiate it. The minister would have to agree to even allowing us to explore that through the process. So, there are abilities to look at rezoning, but you are limited to the policy suite that the state has determined.
Thanks, Craig.
Thanks, Councillor Michael. Thanks, Craig. That's certainly been helpful. Councillor Simon?
I do have one more question. I just wondered, in the report, it says that these delegations can be revoked at will. What does that? Is there a process to do that? I mean, I wouldn't know when we would apply that, but is there a specific process, or is it really just at will, saying we're revoking it now, sort of thing? How does that work?
Thank you, and through the chair.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you, Mayor Bill. That is just a standard terms and conditions effectively for a delegation. But yes, because council delegate, they can remove the delegation.
Yeah, that makes sense. So
just by resolution of council.
They can take it away.
But
well, it wasn't doing the job properly.
Correct, by resolution of council.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Any further questions, councillors? If not, would someone like to move the recommendation? Councillor Dean, would someone like to second that? Councillor Lynn, Any further questions or comments, councillors? If not, I'll put that recommendation. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you, councillors. Been a couple of tricky ones tonight, eh? Whew. Councillors, we move on now to our questions on notice. We don't have any questions on notice. Do we have any questions without notice? Have no questions without notice? Oh, questions without notice?
Thanks, Mayor Bill.
Councillor Michael?
Just a quick one from me. The minutes from the previous meeting, I moved a motion at item 14.5 on a report into our ability to improve community or council's ability to improve community connectivity in Gawler Belt. I know the report's not due until August, but I just wanted to make sure because I didn't see it on the action items that someone's looking at that and it's.
That was in the action items.
It was it? Sorry, I must have missed it. Thank you.
Yeah. Any, councillor Collin?
I'd just like to know, or I know council had a meeting with the tourism minister. I'd just like to know how that went.
Oh, I didn't have a meeting with the tourism minister.
Council did.
Who did?
The CEO and the economic development officer, I think. Had a meeting with the tourism minister and a month or so ago, and I was just wondering how it went.
Oh, I'm going to have to ask because I don't know.
It was just a meeting relating to how the government might view the progression of the Drovers encounter. And all the minister has done is probably provided us some advice in mechanisms for us to move forward with that. But that was really all it was. It was a good productive meeting. And it was actually a meeting that was a bit of information came both ways. So we were able to take some information away and our consultant has used that information, and equally the minister took some information away from us as well, and he's going to try and progress it. But that's really all it was. I think the meeting went for about an hour, but yeah, we can't, as some of the matters are confidential still, we actually can't comment on it. But it was a positive meeting, yeah, like all things, as we know with the Drovers encounter, we are requiring investors to take it to any next steps, and we're certainly not there right at this point.
Thank you, Richard. Any further questions on notice?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm a ratepayer in the Adelaide Plains Council, and I got the council communique from the Adelaide Plains today, which is a newsletter, very coloured newsletter. It's about 4 or 5 pages, fantastic. It comes about 3 times a year. I know in a previous council we did discuss doing one for our council, but it's got all the stuff about community involvement, community questions, all that sort of stuff. It really is a very good article. So production. I just wonder whether someone would like to give a comment about that and whether we perhaps have it reviewed, because it is, well, to my mind, it really gets the message out.
Well, if I could just perhaps say something to that, I think it's a great idea to have a newsletter that is not too cumbersome and too much of a burden on the elected members or council or council staff. But perhaps we could form a group of, say, 3 councillors and 3 staff members to put that together. And perhaps if we decide, say, 2 or 3 times a year, we can change the mix of the 3 people on there and the 3 staff members as see fit, to not burden anyone down to, you know, this, for me, I've got to do this every month or every second month or whatever. But I think it's a great idea to get our message out there. It addresses what Simon talked about earlier. How do we let people know what we're doing at Roseworthy and how we're addressing some of the issues? So it does tick a few boxes. We do put a little newsletter out with the rates notice. That'll come out next week. It's usually got a bit of useful information in that. But I think more of the down to earth nitty gritty information is what a lot of people are looking for too. What's really happening around the place, and I'd be pretty keen to sort of see that pursued. That will have to come from the floor. Any questions or comments about that, Councillor?
Just a comment, if I may, is, I mean, our newsletter, our little thing, the thing tends to get thrown away with, you read the rates and you chuck it away, don't you? But this is actually, it's quite a big thing. So if you do open it comes in envelopes, so it costs a fair whack for them to put it out, I'm sure. But if you do take the trouble of opening the envelope, you've really got something in hand you've got to read.
I think the Barossa Council put one out. I'm not too sure how often, but I'm pretty sure they do. So anyway, something to think about, councillors, perhaps think about something to bring to the next meeting, some ideas or whatever, how we could put this together and who might be interested in putting a hand up for the first quarter. If we had one every quarter, would be reasonable, one every 6 months even would be reasonable. But then it's not such a burden on too many people either if we do something like that. There is going to be costs involved, as you said, but it's not astronomical. And ratepayers do pay a fair bit of money in rates, so to give them a little bit back in terms of information and what's happening in their region, in their street, would be good. Good question. Thanks, Bill. Any further comments in relation to that, or any further motions on questions without notice?
I do have another question. I was wondering if I understood correctly, the rates notice is going to go out this Friday. Is that true? So I think we talked about this earlier, to try to gather a mailing list for people that are interested, like emailing list for people that are interested to receive regular council information. And I think we talked about sending something out with the rates notices so that people can sign up to this mailing list if they wish to do so. So I was just wondering if that's going to be part of this send out. Beautiful. Thanks.
Well done. Thank you, Richard. Good question. They're always good questions when we can answer them. Any further questions, councillors, on notice? Or without notice, pardon me. Motions on notice, we don't have any of those this month. And motions without notice, have any of those? Have none of those. We move on now then, councillors, to the next section of our agenda. It's our last item. It's a confidential matter. There's a recommendation on top of page 66. Can I please have someone move and second that we pause, that we move into confidential, and we might pause for a moment to allow. I need a mover and second to start with. Thank you, Richard. Thanks, Colin. Someone like to second that? Councillor Dean, all those in favour? Those against? That's carried.